Welcome to From the Dust of History, the podcast where we unearth the past, dust off forgotten tales, and bring history's hidden gems back to life. Join us as we journey through time, exploring the stories, people, and moments that shaped our world, one dusty relic at a time. Ready your curiosity and sharpen your wits. It's time to dive into history like never before. Greetings, everyone, and welcome to From the Dust of History, a production of the Biblical History Center. I'm your host, Ben Stevens, and I'm thrilled to be joined today by Emily Pritchett and Christy Barker. We got a fascinating topic lined up for you today. It is actually a documentary that we all watched recently called The Mosaic Church. It's a documentary that can be found on Angel Studios. It's a wonderful documentary, about an hour and 15 minutes long. It actually talks about a lot of the topics that we've been talking about recently, new finds in archaeology to be one of them, but also our last episode, if you joined us, was directly about Megiddo, and this site is found right there in the same area as the Roman camp that we talked about last couple weeks. So we are going to be talking about that today. We're excited about it. It's a wonderful documentary. Again, you can find that on Angel Studios. But to just open up the conversation, the Mosaic Church, Christy, what are your thoughts?
Oh my goodness, I loved it. It was a wonderfully done documentary. First of all, you can tell this wasn't just a bunch of kids with their iPhones. It was really, really well done. Bear Grylls narrated,
Yeah.
so it has that nice classic voice. But also the information in the documentary itself was just great. Top professionals in their fields making wonderful discoveries. The mosaic itself, absolutely gorgeous, one of a kind, and important, so important to Christianity. This mosaic being found, not necessarily for its beauty, which is what most people recognize mosaics for. By the way, mosaics are floors, typically made out of small stones called tesserae, that, when laid out, create a picture, a pattern, spell out words. So the defining feature of this mosaic floor were the words inscribed with the tesserae into the floor. A bunch of people's names were mentioned, a Roman centurion, several women, but also the claim in the mosaic that God, Jesus Christ. So this is the first time outside of Scripture that we see the claim that Jesus Christ is God. First time in history. So that's just really phenomenal find there
And
in
we're not going to
Megiddo.
see that again until the Nicene Creed. It's
Right.
going to take a
Exactly.
lot of Christian history to get to that question again after the gospel of the divinity of Christ. And here we have something in 230 CE is when they date this project to, that is telling us that there is a very inclusive, first of all, inclusive group of people, Roman officer with women inside this church that are claiming Christ to be God, as we eventually will as Christians. Now, Emily, I know you had mentioned this before we started the podcast when you were telling me how you were excited about it and all the archaeological work that went into. What are your thoughts on this documentary?
So I'm going to piggyback off of Christy's statements. I absolutely adored this documentary. The fact, again, it was really well done. Lots of wonderful top tier experts. And the fact that they were able to show a lot of footage of what archaeologists do in the field in regards to, preserving the mosaic, in regards to digging, the dig methods that we use, the setup and the breakdown of even the dig site itself. It was an amazing documentary, and that's all I have to say. Well done to the crew, well done to everyone who participated in it, and big shout out to the Museum of the Bible as well, because I think they're displaying that, right?
Yeah, so the Museum of the Bible currently is holding the mosaic. They're going to have it till July 6th, and I believe it's going to make a stop in London and I think Paris after that, before it eventually does go back to Israel. but it'll be again in Washington, D.C. until July 6th, and the Museum of the Bible, which is a wonderful museum, a wonderful organization. We've recently partnered up with them to do the Elizabeth Elliot exhibit, which was a blessing to be able to have them come down and work on that with us. A wonderful group of people. Highly encourage anyone who can to make it over there. Hopefully, we all can at some point in time make it over there to see. But also in terms of shout out, we did talk about some of the leadership on this dig site, and one of which is particularly strikes home for us here at the Biblical History Center. Christy's been talking about it before we started the podcast. One of our partners at the Israel Antiquities Authority. Christy, maybe you could tell us a little about our friend over there.
Yeah, so one of the people towards the end of the documentary who was key in not only curating this beautiful mosaic, but making sure that it's displayed properly and securely for many people to see and make sure it travels securely is Dr. Orit Shamir. So shout out to Dr. Shamir. I have had the pleasure of working with Orit for a couple of years now. She oversees our collection as well, on loan from the IAA for the Biblical History Center. We just really appreciate her, and we know it took a lot of hard work on her part to make sure that this mosaic made it safely to the Museum of the Bible. Yeah, it just shows you that archaeology, it really takes a team, was one of my big takeaways from this documentary, because it starts off with the initial survey excavation. They do hundreds of these every year in Israel. And so you have the initial survey archaeology team, and then they realize they found something really incredible. So they can't build, where they were hoping to expand a building. They had to cover it back up for its own safety and protection before they came back, used another team of archaeologists to uncover the mosaic again, and then carefully remove it from the ground where it's been for almost 2,000 years, not quite, about 1,800 years, and then make sure it was carefully displayed and moved and cleaned and all of these other things. It takes teams and teams and teams of these guys at the IAA. So they did a meticulous job.
And so much time that went into it. I mean, it was rediscovered in 2004. And then they decide that they're going to actually excavate it in 2024. So it's had all of this preservation done to it from 2004 to 2024. And then from 2024 till now, just recently, it took them, over a year to make sure that this was done right. And that's, one thing you can appreciate about archaeologists, but especially the IAA, how thorough they are in protecting their history, but also being willing to share it with the world. It's here in America. It's going to England. It's going to France. Like, we all get to see it. I think one of my favorite quotes in the documentary was understanding history is understanding ourselves, and them sharing this with the world definitely is allowing us to do that. But to talk about the mosaic itself more specifically, I found some really cool things about it. I think probably my favorite thing about it was the mentioning of the women on the mosaic. I think that's super huge. Emily, the four women, what was the significance of those women?
It just basically shows, and this is, I think, one of my favorite quotes from the documentary as well. I believe it's Dr. Wright who says in the documentary, who says this quote: "Women in the early centuries of Christianity, they weren't back in the kitchen preparing the bread so the men could come out of the prayer house.
Yeah.
They were active. They were discussing theology with the men as equals." And it's such a big deal because back in this time, women in the Greco-Roman period were second-class citizens. They were viewed as property.
Right.
A woman could not hold her own, basically. She couldn't own her own property. She couldn't do any of that stuff. If she was affiliated with anything, she was always affiliated with her husband or her brother or her father, never herself. So this is showing literally some of the first converts to Christianity, solidifying that some of the first converts to Christianity were women, and that these women were not in the kitchen making bread. They were there with their male brothers in Christ, talking about theology, engaging in theology,
which is so rare
as
for
well,
this part of the world,
it's
because
very rare.
you see in these different religions that you see coming out of the Middle East, the women don't have an active role in the relationship with God when it comes to temple worship or anything of that nature. It's the men's responsibility that then flows down from the men to the family, right, to the women, to the children. But here you see an active, almost leadership in a sense of the early Christian church that, and what's now known as some of the earliest Christian church that we can find outside of the gospel.
What's interesting is the way that the mosaic was laid out. The fact that one of the women that was mentioned, it talks about the women that were mentioned, but then it says, and especially this woman named Christe, which one of the experts believed might have been a slave name. So not only do you have these women who possibly are of high rank engaging in, again, theological discussion, you more than likely have a slave woman who has probably been just recently freed that is also engaging, again, in this theology with her upper class cohorts and, again, male brethren as
It's
well,
also
freeborn
a
male
really,
brethren as well.
yeah, it's also a really sassy way to say Christy's name. Christy.
Christi.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. Sorry.
Yeah.
I think you
Hey,
wanted to say something, Christy. Go ahead.
my name is
Yeah,
a
good.
derivative of the Greek, so it's okay. That's all right. It fits right in there. So yeah, I noticed that as well. I thought another interesting thing too was the possibility that maybe these women had been martyred for their faith.
Hmm.
Um, maybe that's why they're being remembered. Or, like Emily was saying, maybe their high status, made paid money to have this installed in the first place. We know one of the women did pay to have the table for the elements of the communion installed because of what it says on the mosaic. But yes, I would say that Christianity really is a religion, and we can see this even in its early stages based off of this mosaic that empowers women, helps them to get an education, encourages them to learn and grow and have a relationship with God, which is honestly unheard of for most people, period, in other religions. I
Yeah.
think of the Egyptian religion where usually it's one priest or one pharaoh going into the temple like once a year and doing one secret thing that nobody sees, and that's all.
Yeah.
That's it. Or Roman religion where you have the Vestal virgins, being the main women involved in religion, whereas it's mostly male priests or the man of the household, paterfamilias, doing these things for religion and for his family. It's a guy thing. Women aren't really involved. And so the fact that this is emphasized outside of scripture as well, I think is really neat. They to Mary Magdalene, I believe, in the documentary, but there were also many other women that we read about: Peter's mother-in-law, Mary, Dorcas, other women.
Joanna, she comes and visits the
Yeah,
two.
Yeah.
yeah. And then
Lydia.
Lydia, Priscilla,
So
all
many.
these women in the New Testament, those two fortunate women, Utica? No, Eudycia and Syntyche. Bless
Yeah.
them.
Eurydice.
They get Eurydice. I don't
It's
know.
Eurydice.
Eurydice was the play.
Oh, sorry.
But anyway, or no, that's Euripides. I forget her name. It was Greek and it started with an E. But they were both mentioned by Paul in one of his letters as needing to get it together a little bit. But still, that shows their involvement in the life of the church, and that is such a cool, wonderful thing, because I feel like a lot of the rhetoric that we hear today is that the church wants to tear down women, it wants to subjugate them, and it's like, no, actually, the church wanted to educate women and empower women and draw them to Christ through relationship, right? So I think this is a wonderful example of that.
Yeah, and more than just a transformative culture or religion, right? A difference. This early form of Christianity, I don't even know if you could really call it Christianity at this point. It's more of, I think, a term that I've really liked is a Jesus movement, right? This Jesus movement is going to shape the very foundations of the Roman Empire. I mean, as I said, this is found in 230 CE. So this is pre-Constantine. As we know, Constantine is the emperor that's going to somewhat convert to Christianity. I put a disclaimer there, somewhat. Look into that for yourselves, right? I don't necessarily believe if he was a Christian or not fully in our definition of the word today. But this is pre the guy who's going to establish Christianity as the state religion for the Roman Empire. I mean, this is the beginning of the Holy Roman Empire, right? This is where it all comes from. And it's this inclusivity, it's this change of tone that is making Christianity so widespread. It's a religion for everyone. And it's so much for everyone that it's literally going to shape the world around it.
Well, I think that's so cool too, because we see this in the archaeological record, but we also see Paul talking about things in his letters in the New Testament, right? He's telling people who are hosting house churches, make sure there's room for everybody. Don't separate the poor and have them in separate seating. Bring everyone together when the elements are passed out, right? You know, he's commending women in the church for doing wonderful things. A lot of the names in that he mentions in his letters are both Greek and Roman. So we see that as well here with the Roman centurion, that it's cultures, it's classes, it's both genders coming together to be the church. And so I think that this mosaic too is also just a wonderful picture of what Christianity, because I think it is safe to call it Christianity. They were first called Christians in the book of Acts. Um, so I think it's safe to say Christianity, although it might look a little bit different than what we think of as Christianity today. But I think this is a wonderful representation of what a church might have looked like for Paul, even because it's not necessarily called a church, this building that they uncovered, although we would refer to it as a church today because there's a table for communion and everything. They called it a Mosaic house.
Yeah.
So I think that is just so cool. That's another cool thing about this mosaic is that it's a beautiful representation of an early church, a New Testament church, a Pauline church, if you will. So it's not quite like a modern church in our
Yeah.
sense, but to them, it was a house of
Yeah.
worship.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And it
I'm
really
I'm
just,
sorry. I'm sorry
no, go
then.
ahead.
I couldn't help but think as the entire, like all this discussion, and maybe it said this in the documentary as well. I couldn't help but think of Galatians chapter 3, verses 28 through 29. Uh, for those who've never heard of these, it's called the 28 starts with, there is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free, there is neither male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. And if you are Christ's, then you are Abraham's offspring, heirs according to his promise. So that made me think about, with all of these people that we got from all these different backgrounds, with the names in the mosaic and possibly more that are coming to this place, it really is a fulfillment of what we have in Galatians when Paul writes that letter to the Galatians.
Yeah, it's definitely the same attitude, right? The same vibe, if you will, that you're getting from the Pauline time frame into this time frame, which isn't too far removed from what's going to be the harshest time for Christians, right? The emperor during the construction of this site around 230 CE is going to be Severus. But just after Severus, we have the big bad emperor Diocletian. Is that how you say it? Diocletian?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
So,
he's worse than Nero. I mean, a lot of people point to
yeah.
Nero as being the worst, but he's definitely up in the game when it comes to persecuting Christians.
Nero was
So,
child's play compared to
so to
Diocletian.
me, The main difference between Nero and Diocletian is this. Nero was insane all the time. He was not politically savvy, in my opinion. He had issues everywhere. Diocletian, outside of the persecution of Christians, was actually an excellent emperor. Okay. Not to excuse killing 17,000 people in like 3 days,
30.
but he was 30 days.
Yeah,
My bad. It was, but I remember still being like, oh my gosh, that's a lot of
yes.
murder. So,
even for Romans.
Yeah, that's really bad. When you're outdoing other Romans, that's awful. So I do want to put that caveat in there that outside of Christian persecution, he actually was an excellent emperor. This is not me condoning his persecution of Christians.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. No. But I just think all that he's remembered is his persecution of Christians because it was so bad. It was so bad. And it was everyone, children, women, old people, like everybody. And at one point, if I'm not mistaken, he even tried to wipe out the line of David. Like it was bad, really bad. So,
well, obviously, I mean, you can see why it was Christianity for these people that have had a long-standing support and success in their traditional religions and the support systems around them. You can see the kind of threat that this new groundbreaking religion would bring to your doorsteps. I mean, it's certainly going to cause some power issues, especially in the frontier regions, which is, again, don't get me started
Megiddo.
about Megiddo. Don't get me started about Constantine, though, with the outside pressure of Christianity. I mean, from Germanic tribes, right? It spreads all over, and in part spreads because of the persecution of Christians, right? It's a catch-20 there for the Romans.
Yeah. So, well, that actually leads to an interesting point about the Mosaic and why it was probably so preserved. And that's because when it was left, it was abandoned not long, maybe 20 years or so after it was
20
created.
Or 30,
yeah, like 20 or 30
it
years,
it wasn't used for very long by Mosaic standards, and by ancient world standards 20 years is nothing. So they found it covered in pottery shards, and that helped preserve it and keep it from external damage. Because a lot of times I know when you find mosaics, especially in a place like Megiddo, there's a huge farm there. You're right there. You uncover a mosaic, but you can't figure it out because it's been, they've had a plow run over it and then an earthquake on top, and then the tractor, So you usually find a mosaic in a location like this in a bajillion different pieces. And so the fact that these Christians who left this church, probably under persecution, covered it so carefully with pottery, broken pottery, to make sure that maybe one day they could come back, and just were not able to, is part of what saved it for us today.
Absolutely. I'm so thankful that they did. It's a wonderful piece of history. It's probably going to be, I mean, there's no way to say with any certainty, but it's probably going to be the most groundbreaking find, I would assume, for Christianity for some time, right? It's going to be hard to top this one. Wonderful documentary. Again, as I said, you can find it on Angel Studios. It is a guild member video only, so I think you have to subscribe to watch it, or watch it at a friend's house that has it, right? But it is wonderful. Again, it's worth the watch. Highly recommend it. We've got a lot of friends that are involved in the project and in the documentary. It's really special. All right, but that is going to do it for us here today at the Biblical History Center. Thank you so much for joining us. From the Dust of History is a production of the Biblical History Center in LaGrange, Georgia. We want to extend our heartfelt thanks to our donors and supporters. Your generosity, your support, your fellowship with us makes all of this possible, and we couldn't do anything that we do here without you. We truly appreciate you, and thank you. Be sure to mark your calendars for May 10th, when we'll be hosting Roman Army Day. I'm sure you've heard us talk about it before, but Roman Army Day is when we're going to have our Living History Day here at the museum, at the center. It's going to be a wonderful day full of lots of fun activities. I do want to just remind everybody, we will have activities that are going to require prior sign up for them, right? You're going to have to register for them online. You can find it on our website. This is going to include things like the meal or the kids dig, right? These are things that you need to sign up for before you come. And that way you can make sure that you are in for those meals. We're going to have a whole lot more there as well. I'm going to amplify again those flowers that are going to be there. Come buy a flower, give it to your mom. It's Mother's Day weekend. We want to see it here. Additionally, we're going to be running a promotional offer exclusive for our podcast listeners, and this is exclusive for Roman Army Day as well. When you come on May 10th, be sure to find Joyce at our front desk and tell her that you think that Roman history is rad. When you do this, she's going to hook you up with a free Roman Army Day t-shirt. Really cool t-shirt for you to enjoy. Again, the phrase that she needs to hear is Roman history is rad. That's RAD, like Roman Army Day. We really hope to see you there. For a complete list of our upcoming events, programs, and more information, please visit biblicalhistorycenter.com. That's biblicalhistorycenter.com. This is From the Dust of History signing out. Stay safe, and thanks, everyone.